Hey friends, today I'm here with the one and only Olivia Schlegel. Welcome, Olivia.
Hey.
Thanks so much for being here and coming to Capitol via virtual Zoom and all of the things to share with us about your young adult and global mission experience and now recruiting on the East Coast, which is awesome. And also like how we met, which is super
Right.
cool in 2018, 2019.
Yeah, I guess it was fall 2018. Yeah.
Time flies. So, could you tell us a little bit about where you're from and where you went to school and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, which is actually where I'm living right now, post YAGM. But I went to school at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is actually where I met Sammy when she was a YAGM recruiter. And I graduated in the spring of 2019, and I majored in journalism and religion. So that was sort of my background coming into YAGM.
Wow, so fun. I did not know that because I also studied religion and communication in my undergrad. I
Really?
just like,
That's
yeah,
so
small world.
fun.
Very cool. Um, so just like a quick kind of going back in space and time, why were you interested in applying for the YAGM program in your senior year college?
Yeah, so going into my senior year of college, I had heard of YAGM. UNC had had a couple YAGM recruiters visit over the years, and I'd had some good friends do YAGM as well, who were also from my campus ministry there at UNC. So I sort of had always had it in the back of my mind. But I went back and forth on like, do I want to go to grad school? Do I just want to like forget all this and get a job, whatever? So when I got to the fall of my senior year and it was like decision time, I knew that I wasn't ready to go to grad school right away. I was really tired of school, and I felt like I wanted to like see something outside of a classroom setting, before I made more decisions, about where my future was going and things like that. And what really appealed to me about YAGM was that it is like a short-term program as far as like service things like this go. It's only 1 year, and it was an opportunity to like both do service somewhere in the world and also to live in a community like in a completely different culture, not as like just a tourist or like a student, but as someone who is like really engaged in the community and getting to work with and alongside people from that community and live with them and learn from them. And so I was really excited about that. And the other thing that really appealed to me about YAGM was how intensely like relationship focused it is, both in the service aspect and in the community of YAGM volunteers themselves. Because I was coming from a situation where I had had a really strong community with my campus ministry at Chapel Hill. I had worked at a summer camp and I felt like I had a very strong community there. And so I was looking for that sort of intentional community post-college. And so I was really able to find that with YAGM.
Nice, that's awesome. So then what community were you accompanying?
So I was part of the 2019-2020 cohort in Jerusalem and the West Bank. So I lived with and worked with the ELCA's global partners, which are the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. So I lived with a Palestinian Christian family and worked at a Palestinian school that was run by the Lutheran Church there. So that was my community, and those were the people who I accompanied and who looked out for me and took care of me while I was there.
Amazing. And you're going to make something for us that you learned to make in your community, right? So can you tell
Yeah.
us about what you're going to make?
Yeah, so while we're talking today, I thought it would be fun to make tabbouleh, which is something that I learned to make while I was in Palestine. This recipe actually has a little bit of a Lebanese twist because the woman from my host community who taught me how to make tabbouleh has family who's from Lebanon. And she was another teacher at the school where I served, and she would often have me and some other volunteers over to her house for lunch, and she taught us how to make tabbouleh. So I'm gonna be making that kind of while we're chatting today. Yeah, and then by the end we'll have some.
Yes, I wish I could taste some. That would be
I
so.
know, me too. That's the sad part.
the like downside of Zoom is you can't share food while we're
Yeah.
cool. Well, while you're um making delicious food, could you maybe share with us what an average day in your community looked like?
Yeah, so as I sort of mentioned before, I worked at a school that was run by the Lutheran Church in Palestine. So I was living in the West Bank in a small town called Beit Jala, which is very close to Bethlehem. And the school that I taught at was in Bethlehem. So every morning I would get up at 6 a.m. And yeah, it was very early. And a teacher from the school would come and pick me up right outside my flat at like 6:30, and we would drive to school. So that was how I started my day every day. And so we went to school together, and then at school I would meet up with my co-teacher, who was a Palestinian English teacher, Miss Lisa. And she was like really my mentor at the school while I was there. I was her like English assistant was like my actual role. And so I would do various stuff for her during the day. Sometimes I would attend classes and like help with the lesson plans. Sometimes I would just like help her like make classroom materials and things like that. So I would usually go to several classes during the day. I was working with students in the 6th through 10th grades. And then after school, if it was a Monday, I had an after school club for the 9th grade students who were part of my classes. So I would hang out after school with them for a couple hours. And I'm pretty sure I was supposed to be giving them like extra English lessons, but it really turned into just like us chatting about various things in English, which was really fun for me to get to know them better and to be like to form that relationship with them. So then after English class, depending on what day it was, I would either go home or I would go to my Arabic lesson. So if it was a day when I went home, I would meet up with my host family for lunch, which we usually had right after school at like 2 or 3 p.m. And so that's because that was also when my host mom would get off work. And so we would have lunch together and just talk about our days or whatever. If it was warm outside, we would do that in the garden. And so we would kind of hang out and chat and have coffee. If it was a day that I was going to Arabic, I would go to Arabic lessons and meet up with a few other of the YAGM volunteers. And then we would study Arabic before our lesson. And then we would go and do our lesson and try to get through that, which was like very fun also. And another great way to get to know another part of the community. We got to know our Arabic teacher really well. He was a really wonderful person who he had us over to his house to meet his wife a bunch of times. And we had lunch with them, which was really fun. And then, you know, yeah, he was a really great friend to us while we were there. And he was very patient with us while we tried to handle that. And then if it was a Wednesday night, I would go to choir practice with the choir that I had joined in the West Bank called the Olive Branches Choir. And that was a choir that was it was probably 60% Palestinians and 40% internationals. So it was like a group of all kinds of different people who were part of this choir that met at Bethlehem University. So I would go to choir practice then and hang out with all my friends from choir and practice for a little while. And then at the end of the day, I would come home and usually meet back up with my host family again before I went to bed. And oftentimes we would watch a movie together. My host dad loved movies. That's like his favorite thing. He'd seen like any movie you could think of, like he's seen it. So a lot of times we would watch a movie together before we all went off to bed. So yeah, that was what my typical days were like in the West Bank.
Wow, amazing. Thanks for sharing. You, in your story, you a little bit told us about some people in your community that meant a lot to you, but I'm wondering if there's someone else in your community that you wanted to tell us about, or how you connected with them.
Sure, yeah. Well, you know, my host family was a really important, you know, I guess I hate to say resource, but just was something that was very important to me while I was there. They were really wonderful people, and they took care of me, and we became really close friends. And they treated me exactly like, you know, if I was their own daughter, which was amazing. But I talked a little bit about them already, so I guess I'll talk about someone who ended up being very important to me during my time there was the teacher who picked me up every day and took me to school. His name was Ustaz Suhail, and he lived just down the street from my flat. And the reason he had to pick me up so early was because the bus stop to go to Jerusalem was right outside my house. And every morning he would drop his wife off so that she could get the bus to go into Jerusalem for her job. So that's why he had to come get me so early. So we were usually the first people who were at the school after like the custodial staff who opened the school. And so we ended up developing like a really great friendship during that time. You know, his sons would usually ride to school with us. And so sometimes we would talk to them about, you know, their school and what was going on in their life. He had a son in the 7th grade who was in a lot of my classes, who was super embarrassed by me and did not want to talk to me. So, you know, we would talk to him and try to get him to talk to me. But, you know, Suhail ended up being the one who pointed out a lot of the important landmarks in Bethlehem to me. You know, he told me a lot about what was going on in the school and like the history of like the Lutheran schools in that area. He was a Catholic, so he pointed out a lot of those like local churches to me as well. And he also told me, you know, about his family and everything. And, you know, he always made sure that I had coffee at school once it was made. And
what a nice human. Wow.
Yeah, he was really wonderful. And he ended up, he and his wife ended up inviting me to spend New Year's Eve with their extended family. And he had 11 siblings who he often told me about during our car ride. So that was a really fun party, getting to know all of them as well.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you got to, I think that's one of the really, really incredible and impactful elements to accompaniment in the YAGM program is you don't just get to be in relationship with people, you get to form relationships with people, and those can carry with you for your life. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So this meal that you're making, is there like a time that you can remember that you shared it with someone in your community, or just like, is there a story behind this, the significance of this meal?
Yeah, actually, so I sort of mentioned this before when I was talking about it, but there was another teacher at the school whose name was Hala, and she was in charge of the kindergarten program. And there was one other YAGM volunteer, Anna, who had the same placement as me. She worked at the same school as me, and also lived in Beit Jala. And so Hala would often invite us over for lunch after church on Sundays. So we would go to church with her at Christmas Lutheran in Bethlehem. That was her church. And then afterwards, we would go over to her place. And these were marathon lunches. Like, we would get there like immediately following church, like immediately following the 10:30 service. So we would often get there before noon. And then we would be there sometimes until like after 8 p.m. And she and her husband were so welcoming to us, and like were always so happy to have us over. And so we would often help them like make the lunch, and then we would eat lunch together, and then we would hang out and talk for like the rest of the afternoon, and we would have tea and coffee and desserts together. So one of the first things that we helped her make was tabbouleh. And as I mentioned, she has family from Lebanon. So this is a dish that is very popular in Palestine, and it kind of varies wherever you are in the Middle East, like how it's prepared. Mm-hmm. So this way, they use a particular kind of wheat called bulgur wheat, which is like very popular in Lebanon. So that's the way I'm making it right now. And so this is one of the first things she taught us how to make, because she said that it was so easy that we could definitely not mess it up. So I have my cucumbers here. This is 2 cucumbers.
Beautiful.
And I've cut up 3 fresh tomatoes that I'm putting in there now. So that's the like basis of it, which, yeah, like Paula said, it's very easy. It's very hard to mess up. And the grain, the wheat, is like soaking right now. And then afterwards I'll mix that in with some spices, and I'll let you know when that happens.
Wow. Oh, it sounds so good. And also like super appreciate the like, you can make this and you can't mess it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh man, I definitely got that a lot in my YAGM experience. They'd be like, you need to make this, the teachers at my school, they would say like, you need to make this for your family and you need to get these ingredients, but you can't mess it up. And it's like, okay, I think that I can, but thank you for your confidence. Like, it's
Yeah.
fine.
And that actually is another reason why I particularly like to make this dish, is that there was a lot of really delicious things that I ate in Palestine. Like particularly a lot of the meals that my host mom made for me are super special, and it's like so hard to find the right spices here to make it just right. So this is something that I can find all the ingredients for, which is nice because it turns out, if not exactly like challahs, like pretty close. So
Right.
there's my
Oh,
cucumbers.
it's beautiful. I'm a big vegetable fan, so that's probably what I think. So I'm wondering also if you could tell us here at Capitol a little bit more about your experience in Jerusalem, West Bank, or things that, what is something that you would want us to know?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that service in Jerusalem and the West Bank is really interesting for a lot of reasons. The main one being that it's a place that a lot of people have heard of and know some things about, and maybe even have some opinions about it without having ever been there or known anyone from there. And, I think that that's like common. Like, there's a lot of places like that in the world where, like, we hear certain information about it, so like we know some stuff about it, but like it's our conceptions a lot of times are shaped by the information that we get from our own experiences and our own contexts. And so I think that when we're talking about Jerusalem and the West Bank, there's two ways that that plays out. One, of course, is with the political situation between like Israel and Palestine, and so some of the information that we know about that in the US. And I think the other way that we think about it is often as the Holy Land, which it is. But I think that a lot of times our only ideas of the place are either like this tense political conflict or the Bible. And so I think one of the biggest things about being in service in Jerusalem and the West Bank was really learning about the people that are there right now. One of the biggest things we talked about while we were there was like ancient stones versus living stones. And so, while we were there, we did have the chance to visit a lot of holy sites and holy places. And that was amazing. Like, that was a wonderful experience that I'm very grateful that I had. But a lot of the places we visited, they're from Jesus's time, and like they're ancient and like they're beautiful and great for us to see, but they're not really what the place is about now. So like while we were there, we tried to focus at least just as hard on the people around us, like the living stones, the people of the land, and what their lives are like, and how that reflects the kingdom of God much more than just, places that we could visit. So yeah, I think that being able to see the experience there with my own eyes, and to meet people who are living there now, and what that's like, was huge for me, both in terms of learning about what life is like for Palestinians in the West Bank living under occupation, and also meeting people who live there today, 2,000 years after Jesus was there, and learning about how those holy sites and the events that happen there are meaningful to them, and also how their day-to-day lives now are different and reflect a different kind of holiness than those ancient stones.
Mm. Thanks for sharing. Do you think, how has that also been, and I know your reentry has looked extremely different due to the effects of the pandemic, but how has that perspective been, I don't know, impacted and influenced by coming back into the United States?
Yeah, I think that it has been very eye-opening for me to see exactly how much what we do in the US affects other places in the world.
Mm.
For instance, Israel is the number one recipient of U.S. military aid. And so there was oftentimes where I found empty tear gas canisters or other things like around the West Bank that, were made in the U.S. And often also I ended up talking to Palestinians, whether that was like people I knew well or just like, people in a cab after telling them I was from the US or whatever, who, knew a lot about US foreign policy and the US government, much more than I feel like I know about other governments. So it was kind of eye-opening for me to see, like, as an American, how America-centric, like, our worldview can often be, but how the things that we do here do have an impact on places around the world, like whether that's what we're supporting or whether that's just thinking about how, oppressive systems and like systems of injustice are global and are reflected in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places. Like there was a lot that I witnessed while I was there of situations that were unjust for certain people that reflected things that happen here in the US as well. So that was also very eye-opening for me and something that has impacted my worldview and the way I've been viewing, especially a lot of current events during my reentry time.
Yeah, for sure.
And that includes the way that the pandemic has affected different people in different ways because of some systems that are already in place. And so hearing about some of my Palestinian friends and neighbors who are having a very hard time during this pandemic just because of already pre-existing issues like access to resources, access to good health care, ability to move around freely, and things like that. So.
The thing that I also really love about the YAGM program is that it helps facilitate and foster this change of world mindset and view and perspective. Like I think there's just so many lenses and opportunities for growth in so many different ways that it's just like really amazing.
Absolutely. And that's been something that I've thought a ton about after I've gotten back, is just talking to like my, some of the other YAGM volunteers who were in a different like context than I was, and hearing their stories, because like I'm by no means an expert on what's happening in Jerusalem and the West Bank, but I do have 8 months of experiences of what I saw. And I also have, the stories that I heard from the people I met while I was there, but I don't know anything about Madagascar or the United Kingdom or any of these other places that other YAGM volunteers were serving. And so it's been a real gift to not only have had, my view of the world and my view of God's kingdom expanded insofar as what I saw, but also in the ability to talk to these different people and hear about their communities and their experience. Like, I feel like with each story that I hear, like my view of what God looks like is expanded like a little bit more.
That kind of gets at another question I was wondering if you could share about is how did your experience as a YAGM volunteer impact or change or influence your faith life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, living among Palestinians, I was often struck by just how faithful people are, and in a sense where it's very easy to be faithful when everything's going well for you, but it's a lot harder to be faithful when things aren't going so well, or when you're living in a situation that's very difficult. And so it really struck me, the theology that I learned from both the pastors in the churches where I was worshiping while I was there, and also just from people who I had the joy of talking to. I did some work while I was there also in the office of Reverend Mitri Rahab, who's like a prominent Palestinian theologian. And so talking to him a lot about the theology of his life was really, really impactful for me. And just talking about God in the sense of what God does for the oppressed and how God is like with people through anything they're going through, and how God, you know, doesn't require anything from us, you know, to earn grace or love, but how as a result of that grace and love, God does want us to work for a better world for everyone who's living among us, like all of God's other children. So I think that the biggest thing I took away was just how my faith can't be this passive thing, but how if I want to reflect my faith in God, that means like living out that justice on earth and trying to build a better picture of what the kingdom of heaven might look like here by making sure that, you know, people are able to live in a more just and peaceful situation.
Mm-hmm. And was that like something you were expecting to learn while going into like this program, or something you had hoped for? Or
I mean, you know, going into this program, I obviously was thinking about, well, what does my faith look like in action? You know, because like service at the core is supposed to be about faith in action. But yeah, I didn't expect that to be a situation where honestly, like my biggest takeaway was like, yes, it is important for us to go out and serve one another. And it's also important for us to share each other's stories, to get to know one another, and to stand up for one another, like in situations where we know that things are not the way that God would have them.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Oh man, I think that's the other really unique element to this program that's unlike other programs, is that you get to learn what accompaniment means, not just about accompanying others, but like how others show you accompaniment, and how like that is where God is showing up and walking in the world alongside us, is like through those relationships. And sometimes it just takes like slowing down and listening to be like a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that was another huge thing, was that like, you know, something that I learned about myself that I didn't expect to was just how like individualistic and like independent I was, which again, like is something I never would have used to describe myself like in college. Like I've always liked having people around me to help me. You know, I'm very close with my family. So like I never would have thought of myself as like, no, I'm super independent. Like I want to do everything by myself. But I think that I wasn't taking into account how individualistic as a culture we are in the US. And so like, you know, especially after 4 years of college, I was used to just doing things on my own, knowing where I was going, knowing what I was doing, feeling confident in that way. And like, I guess I didn't realize that I had assigned a lot of my self-worth to what I could do on my own. And so going to a new place where I didn't know how to do anything, like literally could not do anything. Like I couldn't talk to anyone. I needed someone to tell me like how to use the bus, which way to go, how to go grocery shopping, like all of that. And I was so hard on myself until I realized that like no one was burdened by this. You know what I mean? Like people wanted to help me. People were always reaching out to check on me. And, you know, I ended up just like thinking about like how would I act if this was reversed? Like, would I go this out of my way to help someone who was new to the US, who was trying to find their way? Like I had a woman who I was at a bus stop and I was confused about something. And I tried to ask her a question. This was very early in the year and I didn't speak any Arabic. And I asked her this question in English and she was like, and I was like, okay, no, like totally fine. I'll go ask someone else. And she was like, no, like stay. And she called her friend who she knew spoke English and like put me on the phone with this person. And then that person was like, what's your question? And like, she helped me. And like, it was just like a level of like mutuality and interdependence and like care throughout a community without like I don't know, without keeping score, like without, okay, I helped you, now you help me, or
Mm.
like without thinking that anyone who needed help was a burden. And so like that was huge for me to see that different way of living, and it changed yeah, the way I think about a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too is like, I think the way, I mean, not only is it Western culture influence of individualistic culture that takes us away and takes us away from exactly what you're saying, the kingdom of God and what God wants for us is to be in a relationship and in community. But I think like college culture
Yeah,
also like super impacts that, like, I don't want to be a burden on other people. I need to be
absolutely.
sufficient. Like I need to have all of these things figured out and also like be productive.
Right. That was also a big thing that I like had to really reconsider, like doing YAGM, was like, what does it mean? Like, what is work? Like, what is productive work? You know? And like, obviously, you know, I had a job that I was working at that I really enjoyed. But also like, I think there's so much pressure, like you said, in college to like be productive, and also, yeah, just like in our society to be productive, that I had a lot more free time in YAGM than I had had, honestly, probably since I was in elementary school, which sounds crazy, but like I had so much more free time than I'd ever had. And I just was like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? Like, am I being helpful? Am I doing the right thing? Am I being productive? And it took me a few months to like settle into like, no, it is not about what is productive. It's like, what am I doing? You know, like if I'm not doing something, but I am talking, I'm making a meal with my host mom, I'm helping her like wash the floors, like I'm helping her do something, whatever. Like I'm building that relationship. I'm learning more about a different part of the world. Like, you know, I don't have to be doing something productive like all the time for this to be like a worthwhile and like wonderful experience. And, you know, some of the best times I had while I was there was like thinking that we were going to go to the grocery store that my host mom's sister owned, thinking that I was like, oh, grocery store trip, it'll take 20 minutes. Like the grocery store is 2 minutes away. Like what could
Mhm.
happen? And then we sit there for like 5 hours, you know, we talk to her sister, and then their parents come, we talk to their parents, and then the kids are there, we talk to the kids, whatever, we hang out. And it was like, you know, just like not having, like letting go of like a schedule, letting go of my expectations, and just like letting myself like be in community without having somewhere I needed to be, which was really amazing. And it has changed the way like the way I live even here. I mean, this is obviously a strange time, but yeah, like it honestly prepared me for having long stretches of nothing to do during quarantine. Just, you know, trying to like be in the moment and be with the people who I am lucky enough to have around me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like sometimes, and I've even done this in this like um time together, is I think that we tend to be like, Yagam changed me, or like all of these things changed me, when really I think what's happening, and I love your image of like expanding our understanding of the kingdom of God, is like you were there all along, but these idolatries of productivity and these like things that keep us and bind us from being fully ourselves in the image of God, like this experience and this program helps you to unearth what is already there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. Like I felt like I had been trapped by like the
Mm.
idol of my planner, and that sounds just ridiculous.
Yes.
But like this
Gosh.
idea that like, I don't know, so much, because I also left, like one of the reasons I did YAGM was I left college and I was like, I have no idea who I am at all. And
Mm.
like I'm not gonna say that like that's fixed now.
Right.
But like I don't like who I was and who I'd been for so long was like about being a student, about being a good student. Like I had defined so much about myself, about what I got done in college, like what my grades were, like what I was trying to achieve, what the next goal was, like what the next assignment was. And so having to let go of all of that and being like, you know, I'm working 4 days a week. This is what I'm doing. Like whatever. Sometimes I just don't have anything to do. Like, you know, and thinking about like, well, who am I removed from what I do, you know? And like I think you're right that like a lot of that you know, just the peace I felt just being able to spend time with people and just be with them without thinking about like, well, what's next? Like, what should I be doing? You
Mm,
know, like the parties that I went to, the weddings that I went to with my host family, and like, you know, the New Year's Eve parties, the holidays, the barbecues, or whatever, were the first parties like in my memory where I wasn't like feeling guilty for being there because I had an assignment due like on Monday, you know? So like just like being able to like be part of a community without thinking about like what, yeah, like how am I defined by my productivity rather than like how am I being in relationship with these people and like what is that giving me and giving them.
mm. I think, yeah, it sounds like obviously that doesn't happen overnight, right? And also like your experience is over weeks and months. And also that work is and sounds so liberating from like, yeah, what holds us back in our my planner is right here, literally. It's
Oh, mine looks like that now. It's because I'm back. You know, I have things. So like my planner also looks like that. And like, that's actually been really hard, like as part of reentry that like, there's been so many parts of reentry that were really hard, but this was one that I didn't expect was
yeah.
just being like, not thinking of it as like, well, that was there, this is here. Like, you know, I have to live like this here when it's like, we don't have to live this way. You know what I mean? Like yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Ah, you're so wonderful, Olivia. Thanks for sharing. I still like I have more questions, but I wanted to see how your
Oh,
delicious is
yeah.
coming.
Yeah, so what I did while we were just talking was I had two bunches of parsley. This is the stems that I cut off. Two bunches of parsley. This was the bulgur wheat I used. This is like an Arab company, but I got it at a grocery store here, so you can get them.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did those two bunches that I had soaked for 20 minutes just in like some water while we were talking. So I mixed that in. So all I need to do now, oh, and I mixed in 12 mint leaves that I had chopped up. So now we're just missing the lemon juice and the salt and pepper, but this is what it looks like at this.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
I'm trying not to like dump it out on the floor, but so I'm gonna get the lemon juice, but
Okay. So while you're doing that, I am wondering like some logistical things for our friends, like our young adult friends at Capitol or just anywhere, like what would people need to do in order to learn more about this program? And also like what are the possibilities for them to be accompanying? Like where are their sites and things like that?
yeah, okay. So yeah, back to some logistical stuff. So as I mentioned, like YAGM is a year-long service program for young adults. I did my year right after college, which is a path that a lot of people take, but it is not the only path. You are eligible from the time you're 21 until the time you're 29. So there's a lot of dip time in which you can experience service as a young adult in global mission. In my cohort, we like the greater 2019-2020 cohort, there was a married couple. So like there's lots of different ways to be a part of YAGM and to do service through YAGM. So yeah, year-long service during 21 to 29. Right now we have 10 different country programs, and like those programs all come with a variety of opportunities for what service in those countries could look like. So for instance, the Jerusalem and the West Bank program is, primarily education focused. So there were 6 volunteers there this past year, and we all were serving in some sort of educational capacity. But some of the other placement opportunities that are available in other programs are things like environmental sustainability work, congregational ministry, youth ministry, outdoor ministry. There's a lot of options like that are closer to the church. There's some like human rights in various capacities, like depending on what, like for instance, there's a placement in Mexico where you're working at a migrant shelter. There's a placement in Hungary working at a foundation that protects the human rights of Roma people. So like there's a lot of different human rights work that's available. There's some like healthcare adjacent fields, like HIV/AIDS ministries and like support groups that are related to those ministries. So there's like a lot of different types of service that are available based on like, you know, your gifts and interests and skills, and like those that you share with the ELCA. Our current country programs are Mexico, Argentina, Uruguay. That's one program, but two countries. And then in Europe, we have the United Kingdom and Central Europe, which is Hungary and Serbia. On the African continent, we have Senegal, Rwanda, and Madagascar. In Asia, we have JWB and our newest program, which is Nepal, which is gonna be super cool. And then Australia is our last program. So yeah, like all of those programs, as I kind of mentioned earlier, are super, super different. And like the things that you learn and the people you meet and what you have to share when you come back varies depending on where you are, but all are super important for like building this, you know, mosaic of what God looks like. So those are some of, yeah, the opportunities there. That application for this upcoming year opens November 1st. And so there's like some time at the beginning of that process that's for a written application. Then after the application closes, there's a period of like phone interviews. And all of that is sort of getting to know like what programs you might be interested in, what your gifts and skills are, what your faith means to you and how that plays out in your life, and different things like that. And then at the end of the phone interview round, that would be when formal invitations to the program are extended, along with 2 possibilities for what your country placement might be. And then after that, you attend a placement event called Discernment Interview Placement, where you would interview with those 2 countries and learn more about the programs yourself. And then at the end of that, you would receive your final country placement before departing for service in August. So those decisions are made in late March, early April, and then you would leave the following August.
Wonderful. And when does the application close? Is it January or February or?
So the priority deadline is January 15th. Okay. And applications are still accepted on a rolling basis until February 15th.
Awesome. And can people get in contact with you if they have questions or want to meet up with you or?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you my email, Sammy, if you want to send it out.
Yeah.
And I also have a Google form that I can send you that you can send out where people can just like put in their name and their email, and then I will get in contact with them. You know, later on, I'll send them a link to the application, stuff like that. But if people want to know more right away, including like being able to read a description of each program and what that might be like, you can go to elca.org/YAGM, YAGM, and there's a lot more information there about the program as well.
And you don't have to be Lutheran.
Yes, you do not have to be a Lutheran. You just have to have like some sort of connection to the ELCA or to have heard about the program, honestly, in any capacity.
Right.
But yeah, going to a university like Capital is enough of a connection right there.
Amazing, amazing. Is there anything else that maybe I didn't ask you, or just that you really want our students at Capital to know about the program?
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about what COVID-19 looks like in regards to the YAGM program. So as you sort of alluded to earlier, my cohort 2019-2020 did return from service about 3 months early because of the pandemic, and particularly because of various countries beginning to close their borders and things like that. So there is no cohort in service right now. This is YAGM's 20th year, and so they're taking an unintended but still helpful Sabbath year to do a full review of the program, both internally with global mission staff and also in partnership with like all of our global partners. So this is something that's super important about the program that we kind of talked about, but like didn't completely talk about, which is that YAGM's whole model for service is accompaniment in, you know, an attempt to provide relationship building and service that's developed through trust, through these various partnerships, rather than, you know, a sort of like colonial Christian mission style, where we are like bringing something to these communities that we feel like they don't have, or trying to impose our own ideals or like ways of life on them. But rather each community that hosts us is a partner of the ELCA. And so that relationship has been developed over many years. And those communities have a huge say in where volunteers are needed and where they're placed and what sort of jobs that we're doing while we're there. And so part of that is that we're always in conversation with our global partners about whether or not these programs should continue or are able to continue in these various communities. Like, is this still helpful for you and for us? And if not, is that something we can change, or is it time to, you know, move on from this particular aspect of our partnership? So we're having a lot of those conversations with global partners right now, especially thinking about, we are very confident right now that we'll be able to send out a cohort for the 2021-2022 service year. However, none of us can know what's going to happen. So we're monitoring the situation very closely, and part of that is working with these communities to see what is going to be safe for them and what is going to be safe for us. So we're, that is definitely top of mind. And Global Mission is very committed to keeping applicants for this program year very updated about how the situation is unfolding and whether it looks like it's going to be possible to be in service next year.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think a lot of us are all in places of like, okay, well, what does this look like and how do we plan ahead? So
Right.
yeah, knowing that's still a part of the conversation, super helpful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well then, how is the food?
Yeah, so here it is. We're finished.
It's beautiful.
So, I've got all my like wheat in here and all my vegetables and greens, and my lemon juice and salt and pepper. So I'm gonna try it. I'm sorry, I wish that you all could also eat it.
Yeah. Can you send us like a recipe so we can like?
Yeah, I will. I'll send you the recipe that I used for today.
Oh, it looks so delicious and fresh and beautiful and colorful.
So good.
And you have the whole bowl, so you're like set for the.
Yeah, I just handed it off to my roommate. But
awesome. Well, Olivia, thank you so much for this time together. I wish we could be in the same place cooking together.
Me too.
Maybe someday, but I just genuinely appreciate you as a human being. I appreciate you sharing so much of your story with us in such vulnerable and beautiful ways in showcasing what God can lead us to and what God is calling us to into the world. So
yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. Like you said, I wish I could be with you in person. I wish I could have met all of your students in person, you know, but I'm really glad that we got to do this, and it was really great to talk to you, you know, especially since you were the one who recruited me for this program. So yeah, it's really great to get to talk to you
yeah,
again.
and hopefully it'll continue. There will be more.
Yeah,
more
I hope so.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.